long conversation about it.
About his two opponents on the Republican side, he shifted his focus immediately today to Joe Biden, saying to Iowa voters, you're the beginning. This is the beginning right now. It started. And this is the beginning of something very important. I think it's the most important election in the history of our country. And then immediately focused on Joe Biden.
Yeah, David, you are spot on. When the former president arrived at that caucus site earlier, you can tell where his eyes are focused, and that is on the general election here. Not even
ongoing in a whole bunch of sites across the state.
Let's take another look at the raw vote, where it stands right now, Rick.
Let's see. Can I request, Deanna, the script and the prompter, please?
Is this it?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Oh, wait. Thank you for. Oh, is it? Oh, I didn't read this far. Thanks. Never mind.
50 degrees. Are we up or? They said 8:01. You want to ask him what's going on? Yeah.
We don't know, Joe.
Joe, I think we're just a little delayed. We don't have a hard
Okay.
time that we have to be in or out, so we have not begun yet.
Got it. So I can ramble.
You actually can do whatever you want.
Okay. What? What'd she say?
Okay, just let me know when we're ready.
What'd she say?
Hey, Deanna, I don't know if you can hear me. As I mentioned, I will ask the professor just kind of right off the bat about how this race has already been called, and we may just talk about that exclusively and not necessarily do the questions that are in there. But does the full screen after that Hey, thank you for joining us tonight for a special streaming edition of News 8. I'm John Diaz.
And I'm Shelby Kluber. Iowa caucus goers are deciding who they want as their party's nominee. In the last 45 minutes, a number of news outlets are already projecting former President Donald Trump will win the Iowa caucuses.
Yeah, and those projections in line with the latest polls, which showed Trump with a sizable lead in Iowa.
So we begin our team coverage in Walcott, Iowa, where News 8's Joe McCoy is live for us in Walcott. Joe, what are you seeing out there?
Shelby, pretty good voter turnout here in Walcott. 180 people came here to Walcott to cast their votes. And when I talked with Janita McNulty, who's the leader of the Scott County Republicans, she said on a normal weather night, they would probably expect around 200 caucus goers. But with the bitter cold temperatures, they were only really hoping for 150. Anything after that was gravy. And they had 180 people come out here in caucus, so they are very happy about voter turnout. Now, when it comes down to the breakdown of each candidate, Donald Trump got 116 votes. That's nearly 65% of the vote here in Walcott. I want to get you those other numbers. Nikki Haley, 34 votes here in Walcott. Ron DeSantis, 27. And Vivek Ramaswamy rounding it out with 3 votes. Now, I'm not surprised that Donald Trump did really well here in Walcott. This is a rural county, a place where Trump thrives. But one thing we were going to monitor throughout the night is whether or not voter turnout was going to be positive here in Walcott with it being a rural county. These people out here in Walcott, they have real life issues to tend to. They have livestock to take care of. They have roads that are icy. They have roads that don't have street light lamps on them. But that did not stop them from coming out here and voting. It was really interesting when I was talking with voters, kind of the range of voters that we were seeing. A lot of people who have caucused 4, 5, 6 times before. Also a handful of people where this was their first caucus. And what we were hearing from voters is that they felt like a change needed to be made. And whether this was their first caucus or their 5th or 6th caucus, they felt like they needed to get their vote heard. Now, when it comes to Nikki Haley, I'm not surprised that she didn't do extremely well here in Walcott. Her campaign is really focused on those suburban areas, kind of the Davenports, the Des Moines that are in Iowa. So I'm not surprised that Haley, she only got 19% of the vote here in Walcott. So I'm sure her campaign would have liked to do a little bit better, but at least here in Walcott, I wasn't totally surprised. I was surprised, however, though, by how Ron DeSantis did. He came in 3rd here, only getting 15% of the vote. I thought DeSantis would at least do semi-decent here in rural counties, but at least here in Walcott, it was a Trump-heavy country, and they made their voice heard tonight. But everything in terms of the process went well. The votes were counted twice. They were sent off to the state Republican Party, so there were absolutely no hiccups here. The whole process took only about 45 minutes. The representatives from each candidate spoke. There was a candidate for Nikki Haley, for Trump, and for Ron DeSantis. No candidate spoke in terms of Vivek Ramaswamy, but the candidates spoke. The votes were cast. They put them all into a bucket. They put it on a table. They counted the votes twice, and then they sent them off. And other than that, it was a pretty eventful night here in Walcott. People were happy to be able to get their vote heard, but nothing out of the ordinary. It was a smooth caucus process. John and Shelby, back to you.
All right, thanks so much, Joe. Coming up, we'll check in with News 8's Jenna Webster and Jonathan Fong, who are also live in Iowa tracking voter sentiment and candidate moves.
All right, Shelby, joining us now in studio is Dr. Paul Baumgartner, political science professor at Augustana College. Professor, we're seeing the early calls that this is going for Trump. You just heard Joe report the numbers, at least out of Walcott, 1 representation.
Yep.
This is sort of what we were expecting, but is it quite what we were expecting, or is this sort of kind of even bigger and more record-breaking, if you will, than what you were thinking?
So far, it's bigger. I'd be very interested to see what transpires over the next hour or 2 hours, especially in larger areas of the state. Right now, we only have 1, 2, 3% of the vote counted. But the fact that the state was already called, the caucuses were already called, within the first hour of caucusing, it truly is remarkable. And the kind of numbers that were just highlighted, once again, in a much more rural area of the state, 2/3 of caucus goers going for former President Trump. If he's able to achieve that kind of ratio across the rural parts of this state, not only will he win a plurality tonight, there's a good chance he'll win a majority of the state, and this would be precedent setting. I've shared earlier that a good day, a good caucus in Iowa, you win 5%, 10%. We've had a lot of nail biters over the years. If Donald Trump is able to get a majority in the state, it really would be record-breaking.
Let's expand this a little bit and just talk about whatever the results are, and again, assuming it's Trump winning by some amount. What does this tell us about the rest of the race? What does it not tell us? Because in many ways, Iowa is not like the next states that are up, where we're going to see some results eventually.
That's true. So the state of Iowa only provides 40 delegates to the Republican National Convention, which will occur this summer. So there are states that are going to be coming down the pike even over the next 2 months that send a larger number of delegates. However, if Donald Trump is able to win this convincingly in the first 2, 3, 4 caucuses and primaries, it's unclear that any of the candidates who are not named Donald Trump are going to be able to kind of overcome those hurdles. Iowa is different than New Hampshire. It's different than Nevada. It's different than South Carolina. The size of this state, the economy of the states, also the racial and ethnic demographics within the states. I don't expect Donald Trump to receive 60% plus of the support in New Hampshire, for instance. But I think it is going to place more and more pressure on candidates like Ramaswamy, maybe even DeSantis, to drop out if they're not able to claim second place in the next few primaries and caucuses.
And that was going to be my next question. I mean, of, let's say, the other 4 candidates, DeSantis, Haley, and Ramaswamy, do they drop out after this race, or do they try to hold out because they've spent a lot of money in this state?
Some of the candidates who are not named Donald Trump have approached Iowa differently. For instance, I think Ron DeSantis has pinned a lot of his hopes on doing well in Iowa. If you were to look at his polling numbers in New Hampshire, if you were to look at the kind of TV ads that he and the super PAC supporting him is kind of putting into New Hampshire and Nevada and South Carolina, I think it's clear that DeSantis was hoping for a second place finish here, and also a second place finish that demonstrated that he was the most viable alternative to Donald Trump within the Republican Party. So if someone like DeSantis is unable to claim second place and maybe even falls down to 10%, maybe even single digits in Iowa, that may be a death knell for his campaign. Ramaswamy as well, I think, has been hoping for the past month and a half to make some headway such that he could become maybe a third place contender in Iowa and New Hampshire. If he's not able to do that, I can see greater pressure on Ramaswamy to kind of back out of the race also.
Okay, Professor Baumgartner, of course, we'll continue to follow this as we actually get more official results coming in from across the state. Always appreciate your expertise. We want to show you this quick graphic, though, of what the polls were really leading into all of this. Over the weekend, the Des Moines Register put out their final poll with former President Donald Trump holding a commanding lead over former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, and businessman Vivek Ramaswamy. Again, as we've mentioned, those entrance polls have already showing that Donald Trump has at least matched the results of this particular poll, if not exceeded them. This would be the largest margin of victory, as the professor just mentioned, in an Iowa Republican caucus. Shall we?
Well, while voters in every state will get a chance to nominate who they want as their party's nominee, each state has their own processes and rules. Casey Decker verifies.
Caucuses have begun for the 2024 presidential election, where voters gather at local venues to choose who they want as their party's nominee. But can just anyone show up to a caucus site and cast a vote? No. To participate in a caucus, you have to be registered to vote in that state. And most caucuses require you to be a registered member of the party. Specific rules vary by state. Sometimes you can register on site. Sometimes you have to be registered well in advance. And some states require you to go to the caucus in your local precinct, even bringing proof of your address.
was up by nearly 30 points in the latest polling. And so we know that the former president has an eye just to see how large his victory could be tonight, closely watching the numbers as they come in. More reaction coming into our team from sources close to the campaign saying that this is a bad night for Nikki Haley, calling it very gratified for the Trump team, saying Ron spent all of his money and has nothing left, David.
Rachel Scott with late word from the Trump campaign, from the former president himself, his reaction to what looks like to be a resounding victory in Iowa tonight. Rachel, our thanks to you. Very quickly to Mary Bruce, live at the White House. Mary was actually traveling with the Vice President today, Kamala Harris, who was speaking in South Carolina in honor of MLK Day. And Mary, just as there are other candidates in this race, and we're not getting ahead of ourselves, the fact that Trump is focusing on Joe Biden, this White House is also very aware of Donald Trump's positioning here, how they thought he would do in Iowa as well, based on the polling. And the Vice President seemed very aware of it with her conversation with you today, that they could very well be facing another matchup with Donald Trump.
Absolutely, David. And so far, everything we have seen from the Biden-Harris campaign is very much geared at a race against Donald Trump. Their whole argument, their central argument of the Biden-Harris campaign is to say that this election is really a battle for the soul of this country and a battle for the future of our democracy. I mean, we heard Kamala Harris today when we were with her on the campaign trail saying that the very fundamental freedoms that our country is founded on are what are at risk here. And given that, I asked Kamala Harris, does she think that Donald Trump is a foregone conclusion for the GOP nomination? She wouldn't go that far, but she did make very clear that she thinks that they beat him once, they can beat him again. And David, we are just getting the first reaction from the Biden campaign. They say it is clear Donald Trump is the official frontrunner for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination. This all comes, interestingly, in the form of a fundraising pitch that has just hit everyone's inboxes. It goes on to say we now need to work even harder now. If Donald Trump is our opponent, we can expect vile lies, vile attacks, endless lies, and massive spending. So very much, while this is, not a done deal, but we continue to see that the Biden team is laser focused on what appears very likely and possibly could be a rematch. That is where their attention is tonight, David.
It might be impossible to answer this question, Mary, based on your sourcing within the Biden campaign. Is there a particular candidate that they were hoping to face? Are they ready to take on Donald Trump? And is this who they were hoping would take the early lead here?
I think they certainly saw this coming. I think they were looking at all of the same numbers that the rest of us were. I think, they've also obviously been keeping a very close eye on Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, as the rest of us have. I did ask the Vice President today if she thought that the other candidates, if they posed the same kind of threat to democracy as Donald Trump. Again, she was very, very coy, wouldn't go there, but she did say with confidence that they are going to win. The question is, what is it going to take to pull that off? Because for a lot of Democrats, the early polling, and it is early polling, does show that this could be a very uncomfortable race. If it is, in fact, a rematch, Kamala Harris admitting, conceding they have a lot of work to do on messaging their accomplishments to the American people, and telling me point blank they are not going to take any vote for granted. They know they have to work hard to earn everyone's votes, David.
Mary Bruce, our chief White House correspondent. Mary, thank you. And of course, when we saw and it's just Iowa, one state has gone so far, but the fact that their entrance polling showing that that the economy and immigration going back and forth between being the #1 issue or a very close second, depending on which wave of entrance polling you're looking at. Again, Iowa voters saying the economy, immigration, Rick Klein, will be the key issues. A real quick look at where we stand before we take a quick break here.
Yeah, still very early, only about 5% of the vote in, but it's clear right now that turnout is going to be down pretty significantly from 2016, maybe a consequence of the weather. And if you're looking for a horse race tonight, you're going to get one between Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley. Right now, only about 50 votes separating the two of them. All indications we have so far, DeSantis might have a slight edge right now. Clearly, there are going to be 1, 2, 3. Vivek Ramaswamy in fourth. 3 tickets out of Iowa is the old saying. It may be 3 tickets on the way in and maybe the same way on the way out.
All right. You know this. This isn't the only game in town tonight. There's a football game going on, so we got to take a quick break here so that this crew can get ready for halftime during football. Terry Moran's going to pick up our coverage on ABC News Live right now. I'll pass it to you, Terry, and we'll see you on the backside after the halftime.
Absolutely, David. Thanks very much. Well, you and the team have been reporting on a big story tonight, that thumping victory we are projecting for former President Donald Trump in the Iowa caucus. Is the big question, another big question tonight going forward, how much did all those prosecutions and civil lawsuits against Trump actually help propel him into first place? ABC News senior investigative correspondent Aaron Katursky, he's been covering all Trump's legal battles for us. He joins us now. And Aaron, Iowa tonight, that's where Trump is. Tomorrow, a New York City courtroom. Take us through this conflict and just how remarkable it is that he's going to win Iowa probably like no candidate ever has before, and then show up in court tomorrow.
Just stunning, Terry, how the nation's politics and former President Trump's legal calendar are colliding, and it's forcing the American public into this same collision of politics and the law. And the question is whether it even matters, because our entrance poll data shows that 2/3 of Iowa caucus goers on the Republican side say that former President Trump is fit for office, even if he's convicted of something. We're a ways from that. And you're right, Terry. Nikki Haley's going to head off from Iowa to New Hampshire. Ron DeSantis says he's going to South Carolina. Former President Trump is coming here to New York, where he is expected to attend a civil defamation trial that's getting underway in Manhattan federal court, brought by a magazine columnist, E. Jean Carroll, who Donald Trump defamed and sexually assaulted, and a trial's getting underway to determine how much money he might have to pay her. So it is a much different victory lap, but being in these courtrooms, which has been a choice for the former president, it doesn't require his presence until later on in the year, that seems to have been working for him, Terry.
Absolutely. That choice, right? He doesn't have to show up in that court. And it is remarkable to think in that case, he's being accused of defaming this woman because he's denying her allegation, which has already been found to be true by a jury, that he sexually assaulted her in a department store. If any other candidate in American history had done that, it would have been curtains for him. But Trump is different. And I want to pick up on something you just talked about, this exit poll that shows that 2/3 more of Iowans say that even if Trump were in prison, he'd still be fit for office. That is a verdict on how much those people trust these institutions, isn't it?
Oh, it is, Terry, that they are not necessarily believing. They're believing Trump in how he frames these cases, and they're believing Trump in terms of how he's framing the election. Look at another number in the entrance poll. 66% of Iowa caucus goers tonight say they don't think Joe Biden's victory in the last election was legitimate. And former President Trump is being prosecuted for that very notion. In fact, he is scheduled, if the calendar holds, and it probably won't, but if it does, he's scheduled to go on trial for that on March 4th in Washington, D.C. federal court. That's one day before the Super Tuesday primary. But to his supporters, these cases certainly don't seem to matter, and they're siding exactly with his rhetoric on how he is presenting and talking about all of them.
About the 2020 election, as you point out, which will make the general election, assuming he wins the Republican nomination, really a question of truth and lies. Which will the country go for? Because he's going to make the fact that he claims he won 2020 a central part of his argument to the American people. But I want to ask about how all of these court cases are going to intersect with the rest of the primary season. How hard is it going to be for him?
Well, look, till now, it's been a choice. The next time he has to be in court would be when he stands trial as a criminal defendant. March 4th is when the federal election subversion case is supposed to go to trial. He's fighting that. That will probably get delayed. The first case may well be later in March. To porn actress Stormy Daniels, bringing you back to the 2016 campaign. But by then, Terry, if tonight is any indication, he may well have the nomination locked up before he ever has to stand trial. So it could curtail his ability to campaign in what would then be a general election against Joe Biden. But there's a lot left here, and certainly the president has a different intention when it comes to how he presents former President Trump's legal troubles.
Aaron, you're such an ace reporter on these cases, but you're also, this is part of the campaign, so I appreciate your political expertise as well. Stand by right there, because let's go to Iowa. Let's bring in Mary Alice Parks. She's been talking with voters at a caucus location out in West Des Moines tonight. Mary Alice, set this scene. What are you hearing from voters?
Yeah, Terry, they just wrapped up the voting here. People writing their preference on a little piece of paper. They counted them all together in the front of the room with the cameras rolling, members of representatives from each campaign looking over. I mean, this is as grassroots as it gets. Now, in this site, a really different story. Here we had Nikki Haley. She won 88 votes here. I mean, a sense of just how small and grassroots this is. That was the winning total. Ron DeSantis second in this room with 74, and Trump third. You know, this was a part of the state where Nikki Haley was expected to do well, but it's interesting playing into this larger conversation you've been having, because I've been talking to those never Trump voters. I have to tell you, a fair number of them who have been frustrated with what they see as his drag on the party, and listening in particular to the woman tonight who spoke on behalf of Nikki Haley. She focused so much on what she said was Nikki Haley's potential electability, and talked about losses that Republicans have suffered in the last few races and the last few elections, really pinning that on the former president. You know, I've talked to some Republicans in these last few days who sound really frustrated in Trump's focus on the last election, his focus on him saying that big lie that he won the last election. And so, of course, going forward, if he does wrap up this nomination, those are going to be the voters that both campaigns are focused on. Will they swing? Will they sit it out? What happens to those Republicans that aren't excited? And we know that they exist. We've seen them in rooms like this.
You know, Mary Alice, you've been out there on the ground in Iowa for a while. I want to pick up on what I was talking about with Aaron Katursky. These cases, the prosecutions and civil lawsuits against Trump, have helped him. What did you hear from voters about that?
You know, I've just been talking about those voters who tell me they're never going to vote for the former president, those Republicans that want a way forward. They'll talk about, some of them will talk about how they don't like his tone, or they didn't like how he acted and didn't concede after the last election. But when I ask about those court cases, even those voters often are quick to defend him. There is this sense that that has worked. It's been his message that a court case, an indictment against him, is somehow an indictment against them as Republicans. That message has landed. People have internalized it. Even those who weren't planning to caucus for him feel under attack and feel like it has been unfair, that it's been political, that too many of those court cases are unfounded. It has been very interesting to me that even some never Trump Republican voters are quick to come to his defense when we're talking about those criminal indictments. They want to see less of that conversation in this primary, and they have absolutely internalized his message about this being an attack.
You know, there's so many of them, and so many, you know, that are on untested legal theories and were brought by prosecutors who campaigned against Trump. You know, some of that sentiment may be understandable. But I want to ask about the ground game here. Trump, you know, he barely appeared in Iowa, really. I mean, the fewest amount of visits compared to Ron DeSantis. He was in all 99 counties. Vivek Ramaswamy spent so much time there. What do you think? Does Trump's win in Iowa change the notion of retail politics, the ground game? Does it still matter in Iowa, as it has since Jimmy Carter used it to win the Iowa caucuses, which propelled him to the White House way back when?
That's where, Terry, I think the actual numbers out of tonight are going to really matter and tell a part of that story. I mean, we were talking about this projection at ABC News based on entrance polling, when I will tell you that here at this caucus location, one of the biggest in this area, they hadn't even passed out, they hadn't even started the balloting. They hadn't even started writing their preferences down. And the margins that we see at the end of the night, whether or not people were persuaded by some of the speeches from their neighbors, or what exactly the final numbers were, who came in second by how much, I think that will start to answer that question, Terry. You know, I'm thinking about just a few weeks ago when Nikki Haley's supporters told me that they were really hoping she would come in second. Trump winning was a foregone conclusion to them, but if she could come in second, would that send a message about her as the alternate candidate heading into New Hampshire? Then, of course, we saw her ticking up in the polls, her doing so well in the latest polls here, and all of a sudden it was a real conversation about her coming in second. But we've heard all along from so many state party officials, voters here on the ground, that they were assuming Trump was going to win, but that who did well, who overperformed, who underperformed, would show off and sort of get to your point about whether a ground game still really mattered. And that's, of course, where we're going to have such a conversation, especially about Ron DeSantis. Because if he underperforms, like we've been talking about all night, when he spent so much time here, so much money, and did build out a decent ground game, if he still underperforms, if he comes in third, if it's not close, for example, between him and Nikki Haley, there will be so much more pressure on him. And a real suggestion, like you were just talking about, that maybe that kind of retail politics didn't have a place, at least in this cycle. But that's where we have to wait for these final numbers, and they are just starting to trickle in.
Right, and Trump is so different, but so many voters there, like all of us, get so much of their news and politics on, online now. Mary Alice Parks, I'm a little jealous. I love a good caucus night. Thanks for being there. And Aaron Katursky as well. We're going to take a quick break right now. When we come back, we're going to join Lindsay Davis in New York.
With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any other newscast. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir, America's #1 most watched newscast across all of television. From America's #1 news comes the all-new ABC News app. Breaking news, incredible video, faster, smarter, and customizable to your interests. If you love being in the know, you're gonna love this. Experience the all-new ABC News app. Download it now.
Everything is so fine, little bit of sunshine. Some more, just a little bit. Breathe more, just a little bit. Smile a little more in a minute. I've been running through this strange life. Pictures on my phone life. Everything is so fine, little bit of sunshine.
Good morning, America.
We are here in Israel, a nation at war.
We've seen tank after tank pouring into this area. This is where it all began.
Bullet holes all up the wall.
Within minutes, the air raid sirens going off.
You can hear the sound of an explosion.
We are pinned down here.
Tonight, Israel waging a fierce bombardment of Gaza.
The Israel-Hamas war. For non-stop live coverage, stream ABC News Live.
Reporting from southern Israel.
From the front lines in downtown Ramallah. In Beirut.
Wherever the story is, we'll take you there.
ABC News Live.
First thing in the morning.
There's a lot going on.
Everybody in that home is okay.
To catch you up with what happened overnight. We are here at fashion's biggest night out.
What's happening today? YouTube has unveiled a new set of policies.
What people are talking about. The new ad campaign.
Fast, straightforward.
With some fun in between.
A real-life Barbie dream house.
A name change for the Wienermobile.
First thing in the morning.
America This Morning.
America's #1 early morning news.
On ABC News Live.
In an interview, you talked about how you felt the boogeyman was coming.
Yeah. But since I was a kid, I felt someone's gonna get me.
The case of Jonathan Majors, the actor convicted of charges.
What happened exactly, do you know?
No, I don't know. She went conscious.
Your defense team has said that you were the victim of that night.
Who received injuries in the car? I did.
Jonathan Majors Speaks, the Impact by Nightline exclusive, now streaming on Hulu. The candidates face each other, face America, and face off right after Iowa and right before New Hampshire votes. David Muir and Lindsay Davis moderate. ABC News, the New Hampshire primary debate. Thursday night on ABC and streaming everywhere on ABC News Live and Hulu.
Reporting from Monterey Park, California, I'm Robin Roberts. Wherever the story is, we're going to take you there. You're streaming ABC News Live.
Why do so many people start their day here?
From ABC News, this is Start Here.
To be in the know and get a different take on the day's top stories.
A lot of news today, so let's get into it.
Listen now to the Daily News Podcast honored with 4 Edward R. Murrow Awards and see why the New York Times calls it a news podcast worth listening to. Start Here, ABC News. Make it your daily first listen.
Now, that's a part of the story I bet you didn't see coming.
Wherever you get your podcasts, Start Here.
All right, here we go. You ready? Let's do it.
Yes, it's the show America wants and America needs right now.
This is What Would You Do? Let's go. How are you?
Yeah. So what will you be watching Saturdays on ABC News Live?
What would you do?
Hey, I guess I just found out.
The What Would You Do Marathon, 2 to 6 Eastern, every Saturday on ABC News Live.
My favorite show.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us on this special Iowa Caucus edition of Your Voice, Your Vote. Based on the entrance polls, ABC News projects that Trump will win the Iowa Republican caucuses. Let's take a look at the results here. Former Donald Trump made a visit to caucus event in Clive tonight, but you see there Donald Trump with 49.2% of the vote. Ron DeSantis just below 23%. Nikki Haley just above 20%. Vivek Ramaswamy coming in with 7%. Trump's competitors, it looks like, as we expected, Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis coming in neck and neck, really a race to second place right now. An interesting coincidence, Haley and Donald Trump Jr. showed up to the same caucus event, and Donald Trump Jr. had this to say.
Because I'd love not to be in wars. I have 5 young kids. I'd like to not send them to Ukraine or China or Taiwan to die so that someone at Boeing and Raytheon can sell a few more missiles.
As for Vivek Ramaswamy, based on analysis of the vote, ABC News projects that Ramaswamy will come in 4th place in the Iowa caucuses. ABC News estimates that turnout in the Iowa caucuses will be much lower in 2016. Of course, a lot of that expected to be because of the Arctic temperatures they're experiencing there throughout the state and really much of the country. Let's go right to ABC's Rachel Scott, who's with the Trump campaign in Des Moines. Rachel, the president has already reacted to his win. What is he saying?
Yeah, the former president reacting to this projected victory here in Iowa, saying that he is honored for such an early call. And guess what? The Trump campaign already fundraising off of this, with just in moments of this projected victory being called by all of the networks. We're also hearing from sources and allies to the former president, most notably from his super PAC tonight, calling for this field to narrow, insisting that the people of Iowa send a clear message tonight that Donald Trump will be the next Republican nominee. They are calling for Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, and Vivek Ramaswamy to face the reality and, quote, stop wasting time and resources. And that really underscores what the Trump campaign is trying to send tonight. They're trying to send a message to the rest of the field that he is the far and away front runner in this race. Of course, the Iowa caucus is not always known for necessarily predicting the Republican nominee, but they are known for winnowing and narrowing the field. And one thing that the former president's team is keeping a close eye on tonight is just how large this projected victory is expected to be. They're hoping for the biggest number possible. We know that no Republican has won a contested Iowa caucus by more than 12 points. The Trump campaign betting on a number much higher than that, Lindsay.
And Rachel, the former president now has both New Hampshire and an upcoming court case to think about. What do we know about that?
And it's been remarkable to see the former president split his time between the campaign trail and also the courtrooms. In the final stretch here, up to the Iowa caucuses, when we would typically see the frontrunner in this race blitzing the state, trying to turn over every single last voter, we didn't see that at all. Former President Donald Trump was in a New York courtroom. He was in a D.C. courtroom, as his rivals had the campaign trail largely to themselves. And he is expected to even be splitting his time again this upcoming week, as his rivals already get out there in New Hampshire. Even with that, though, even though the former president has campaigned here far less than his rivals, he still does have this dominant hold on the Republican Party. And that is exactly what we are seeing by these early projections tonight, Lindsay.
All right, Rachel Scott, our thanks to you. Of course, we're going to continue to come back to you throughout the night. Now let's head over to ABC News political director Rick Klein, who's holding it down for us at the big board. It sounds like there's a technical glitch that we need to deal with first off, right, in Iowa?
Yeah, well, there's definitely a delay. And we just got some more vote in, but there have been about a 45-minute lag. So we're trying to get answers from the Iowa Republican Party. Remember, this is a state-run, the party-run event. It's not run by the state officials. It's not run by any election authority. It's run by the Iowa Republican Party. We remember how the Democrats botched their caucuses 4 years ago. We had to wait more than a day to get any results. It's not nearly that bad tonight. We are getting some results, but they are scattered. They are partial. They are incomplete. Only about 13% of the expected vote in. And you see the numbers right now. I would also highlight, Lindsay, that there's something else on our map that just populated for the first time, a color other than Donald Trump's. This is a county that I've had an eye on because it is in the far northwest corner of the state. It's one of the most heavily evangelical counties in the state.
Welcome back to our 2024 Iowa caucus coverage. Results are coming in from across the state with about 4% of precincts now reporting that number actually jumping in the last 30 seconds.
Yeah, so far, former President Trump has a commanding lead. The last number we were able to calculate, 51% of the votes.
We want to continue our team coverage at caucus headquarters right now in Des Moines. That's where we find News 8's Jenna Webster. Jenna, what's it looking like out there?
Hey guys, yeah, I am actively tracking those results that you guys were just talking about. You know, like you just mentioned, we just got a big spike in the number of votes actually on the website that have been calculated. Right now, we're at about roughly 41,000 votes. Keep in mind in 2016 when they had that record caucus turnout, that was about 186,000 people that voted. So still very early numbers, but really just in the last few minutes, we only had about a dozen or so counties reporting. You know, Trump has kind of been declared the winner. He's the projected winner right now. Most of those were for Trump. Johnson County, where Iowa City is, was leaning towards Haley. But just in the last 2 minutes, about a dozen or so more counties all turned to Trump, including Johnson County. So I want to break some of them down for you. I'm going to look at my laptop where I have these results coming up for a second. In Scott County, we have about 83% of the precincts reporting right now. Right now, Donald Trump is in the lead there with about 2,300 votes. Nikki Haley is actually right now in second behind Donald Trump, about 1,200 votes there. Muscatine County has not reported anything yet. Clinton County, it's the same thing. Trump in the lead with Haley in second. They're 83%. Also, down in Louisa County, 80% has been reported there, but that second place actually flips with Ron DeSantis in second. He's about 20 votes ahead of Nikki Haley right now, but still 150 votes behind Donald Trump. So we're still really kind of in that who's going to take second place right now. Right this second, Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley are really neck and neck, 20% for DeSantis, 19.4% for Haley. So, you know, as we've been saying, a race for second place. They want that momentum going into New Hampshire. But, you know, as we're talking about and going over these results, we've got about 9% of the counties that have been approved right now. The big message that we've gotten from the Republican chairman tonight that all these results are coming out. They want it to be very accurate. They want it to be very transparent. Let's take a listen to what he had to say earlier.
1,657 precincts is, and that's who's going to report, and you're going to see every one of them broken out, triple, quadruple checked for the accuracy of those numbers. It will be impossible for a candidate to question a process as transparent as us, because every single person in the world can see what I see and can look at the paper trail.
On this campaign because Trump
so looking at these results that have come out so far, you know, we've been talking about, you know, the fight for second place and how DeSantis kind of really has the most to lose from getting in third here. He put in the most time into Iowa, into his events. He had more events in Iowa than Trump and Haley combined. When we spoke, let's talk about the Democrats here for a second. I'm going to put my laptop down because it keeps falling. Okay, we talked talked to the Democrats earlier, to Rita Hart, who is the chair of the Democrats, kind of about, what they're doing tonight. Obviously, they are voting by mail. Tonight is a little bit about party business and stuff. But she said Democrats are feeling very energized. They're really looking forward towards November. And they're really focusing on the state right here. And, there's a Republican legislator, there's 4 Republican Congress people. So they're kind of looking at, these state races and who can be competitive in those, but feeling very energized moving forward. We're going to have more results tonight. I'm going to keep tracking how our counties are doing and who's in the race for second right now. But for now, I'll send it back to you guys.
All right, thanks so much, Jenna. We're going to continue checking in with Jenna throughout the night, as well as with News 8's Joe McCoy and Jonathan Fong, who are also live in Iowa, tracking voter sentiment and candidates' moves. But for now, we'll toss it over to you, John.
Thanks, Shelby. Professor Baumgartner has been with us for much of the night here, kind of helping us analyze all of this. There's a lot of questions I have for you, but one is just maybe a history lesson here. Have we ever seen anything quite like this? And what is maybe the closest thing? I mean, you're shaking your head as if this is almost unprecedented.
For a modern contested Iowa caucus, this really is unprecedented. It's one thing when an incumbent president runs away with a caucus or primary. This is oftentimes to be expected. But when you truly have a contested primary or caucus and you see something like this, you should really take note. The Iowa caucuses in particular have oftentimes come down to a few votes, right? I'm thinking now of the 2020 Democratic presidential caucus here in Iowa, in which we were kind of held in abeyance for a few days, right? And then it was razor thin between Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders. Also, if you want to keep it on the Republican side, oftentimes candidates, even victorious candidates, don't even meet the 30% threshold, right? And the difference between the winner and the second place finisher oftentimes is a matter of 1% or 2, right? I'm thinking of the 2012 Republican caucuses here in Iowa. They were just neck and neck between Mitt Romney and Rick Santorum. What are we looking at today? Well, once again, if the percentages hold, we're looking at a candidate, Donald Trump, who will receive a majority of support, right? More support than every other candidate combined. There's a chance that he could win the Iowa caucuses by 25–30%. This really is unheard of. Back in 2000, the year 2000, it was deemed a runaway when George W. Bush won by 10%. And he only was able to accrue 40% of the vote. He didn't receive a majority, he received a plurality. And this was viewed as a real shellacking. That was a 10% win and a 40% clip. Right now, we're looking at the possibility of Donald Trump winning 55% of the vote, and the second highest vote getter maybe sitting around 20%. Yes, we really are in uncharted waters.
And I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but as you were looking at the results come down, you saw the results for Scott County.
Yes.
They really were not in Nikki Haley's favor. They needed to be, though.
I think that her camp will try to spin this. Once again, she's currently in second place in Scott County, but this is the kind of county that her campaign wanted to just rack up the votes, right? So she was focusing so much attention on urban areas, suburban areas, areas with a large number of highly educated, oftentimes affluent voters. She believed that it's in these sorts of counties that she could get first place, maybe a close second place. And right now, Donald Trump maintains a commanding lead in Scott County.
Starting tomorrow, does Trump essentially get to say, I am the presumptive nominee here? Does he get to put that pressure on?
Yeah, I think he will put that pressure on until another candidate demonstrates that they can beat him. This was the worry for Republican voters who did not support Donald Trump. Their worry was that he was going to come into Iowa, win in a landslide, and then he was going to win subsequent primaries and caucuses, also by a landslide. So until a candidate is able to say, hey, I can beat Donald Trump or I can keep it neck and neck, lose by a few percent, then he's going to say, I'm your nominee.
All right, Professor Baumgartner, a lot of interesting insight there. We thank you for your time. We'll see you, of course, on News 8 at 10 after the game. Shelby.
All right, thanks, guys. We want to take you guys into a close-up look, a county-by-county examination of how these caucuses are shaping up. So we'll see if we can pull my computer up on the screen. Here is a look at statewide results so far, thanks to our AP map. Now, I gotta tell you guys, I had my numbers all ready to go in about 30 seconds before we came back on air. Like you heard Jenna say, we had a couple thousand more votes get deposited, but you're seeing a lot of purple on this map. That's all for Trump. The yellow is supposed to be for Haley, but right now, as of right now, Story County over by Des Moines is the only county that shows Nikki Haley in first place. Now, right before we came on air, it was actually Story County, Polk County, which has Des Moines, and Johnson County over here, which is Cedar Rapids, Iowa City area. That has changed, obviously, but we've seen Nikki Haley still closely trailing in these areas. However, she was 3 of the 5 counties in Iowa that went for Marco Rubio back in 2016 were Story County, Polk County, Dallas, Johnson, and Scott, of course, with Davenport. Now, 4 of those 5 counties that went for Marco Rubio in 2016 are now all going to Trump. So we'll have to wait and watch those as well. So far, I'm not finding a single county that Vivek Ramaswamy is leading in. I'm also not seeing a single county that Ron DeSantis is leading in. We do see one instance, if I can find it, right here. Lucas County, down in the southern central part of Iowa, is the only county I can find so far where Vivek Ramaswamy is even in second place. It's usually a fight for third or fourth, depending on what county he's in right now. So we'll continue to monitor these maps throughout the rest of the night. But for right now, we're going to take a look at what's going to happen after all the caucusing is over this evening.
After tonight's caucus, all eyes head to New Hampshire. Granite State will be the next to cast their vote in the first primaries of the election season on January 23rd, followed by South Carolina Democrats on February 3rd, Nevada on February 6th and 8th, and back to the Palmetto State on the 24th as Republicans cast their votes. Michigan heads to the primaries February 27th. Idaho and Missouri Republicans caucus on March 2nd, followed by North Dakota on March 4th, before 14 states vote on Super Tuesday. That's also the date we'll hear the results of the Iowa Democratic Caucus.
All right, we now toss it back to ABC for more live coverage.
Yeah, we'll see you back here for News 8 at 10 after the game.
Donna, some Democrats, as you know, are criticizing the Biden campaign for not acting with the urgency necessary to take on the former president. How do they respond to that?
Well, I think the president has shown over the last couple of weeks that he's willing to go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump. But first, I mean, the Republicans have had this stage to themselves for over the last year. We've been debating the merits or demerits of the anti-Trumpers. We've been talking about whether his fitness for office. And most of all, we've been talking about the 91 indictments that he is facing in the court system. So the day will come when there will be the quote-unquote matchup. But for now, the Republican, this is the launching of the 2024 Republican presidential primary season. This is a race for delegates. The Democratic race will start on February 3rd in the great state of South Carolina. And I do believe at the end of the day, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be up to the task, convincing not just Democrats but independents that they have a vision for the future, which does not include recrimination, grievances, and lying.
All right. Former DNC Chair Donna Brazile, former RNC Chair Reince Priebus, we thank you both so much for your time. And ahead, we still have a lot more coverage of ABC News Live, your voice, your vote. Stay with us. heard from supporters who are choosing to support her over other candidates tonight?
You know, a lot of what we heard from supporters as we were speaking to them was they were looking for someone who could win the general election, who could win in November, who could beat Joe Biden. A lot of those supporters didn't want another 4 years with Donald Trump, but they definitely didn't want another 4 years with Joe Biden as well. So they were looking at that. And the recent polling has shown when you look at a head-to-head with these candidates against the current president, Nikki Haley was the only one that came away with a wide margin to win that race. And so they felt very comfortable with her, that if they could get behind her, the support could coalesce around her, that she could win in November, Lindsay.
Ava Pilgrim, our thanks to you. We'll be checking back in with you later on tonight. Now let's go to ABC's Rachel Scott, who's with the Trump campaign in Des Moines. Rachel, the president is already reacting to this win. He predicted this. What's he saying now?
Yeah, the Trump campaign already fundraising off of it. The former president said he's grateful for such an early call. We are expecting the former president to speak in just a couple of minutes here. And I'm starting to see so many congressional representatives walk in. I just caught up with Congressman Matt Gaetz as he made his way in here. He said, we are expecting this number to only grow larger and larger and larger. And with that, he says that he is hoping that the rest of the field is watching this and getting the message here. Because again, that is what this is about for the Trump campaign. Not only setting the expectation that he's the dominant front runner in this race, but also that he can do better and maybe have a historic win here in this state. That's what they're really betting on. So they really have their eye on those projections and the numbers as they are coming in here. And this space that was empty before as we projected this race now starting to fill up here, Lindsay, anticipating the former president.
And the former president now has both New Hampshire and an upcoming court case to juggle. What do you know about how he plans to balance both?
This is going to be a remarkable time for the former president, who will now have to once again split his time between the campaign trail and the courtroom. You know, this is something that we talked about when these indictments initially came down as the former president was ramping up his 2024 campaign, and now it is his reality. Here in Iowa, though, it really didn't seem to have much effect on his campaign. I mean, he was barely in this state. He campaigned here far less than his rivals, only holding some 30-odd stops. Compare that to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who visited all 99 counties, had over 170 stops. But the former president still maintaining this very large lead here. It remains to be seen whether or not that's going to get tougher. We know that Nikki Haley in New Hampshire is now within striking distance, single digits of the former president. And so we know that Trump already has a slew of campaign events scheduled in that state, Lindsay.
Rachel Scott, our thanks to you. We'll come back to you in a few hours, during the next few hours. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis trails behind Donald Trump and finds himself neck and neck with Nikki Haley. ABC's Whit Johnson joins us now, also in Iowa. Whit, what have you been hearing from the DeSantis campaign?
Well, Lindsay, the party is just getting started here at DeSantis headquarters. People are starting to file in. There is an energy here, but they are also expressing frustration within the DeSantis campaign about that projection for Donald Trump. They are angry about that, but they always knew coming into tonight that this was going to be a race for second place here in Iowa, and they were banking on their ground game to carry DeSantis through. Again, as Rachel noted, the 99 counties that he visited, having more events than Donald Trump and Nikki Haley combined here. But they are seeing some positive signs as well. In Sioux County, for example, some of the early numbers, this is western Iowa, they have seen DeSantis doing well there, and that is encouraging. That is an area that has a large number of evangelical voters, and we know that the evangelicals and the traditional conservatives in the state, that was very much a focus of the DeSantis campaign coming in here, which is why they made Iowa such a big part of it. They went all in on this state and built this organizational platform so that they could get out there and get across the state. And even tonight, DeSantis was crisscrossing the state, going to a number of events and actually speaking at some of those caucus locations, trying to make that final pitch that he is the person, not Donald Trump, who can deliver on those promises for the voters.
And it sounds like he plans on staying in Iowa for tonight, but perhaps foregoing New Hampshire altogether and heading straight to South Carolina. Do you know the plan moving forward?
Exactly, and we asked him about that. What is the plan, especially because most people believe if he does not finish in first or second place here. There is a major question about how he could move forward in this campaign. What happens with the fundraising? Does the money dry up? He says he is in it for the long haul, and he insists he will do well in this state. They have a plane waiting for him to take him to South Carolina later tonight. They say regardless of the outcome, DeSantis will be on that plane. Then obviously they will be in New Hampshire later on, moving towards the New Hampshire primary. He says it's a matter of racking up delegates across the country. But again, major questions about how he stays in if he doesn't have a strong finish here tonight. The campaign has indirectly been lowering expectations a little bit. We heard DeSantis early on saying he was going to win Iowa. He said that repeatedly, but more recently he's been saying that they're going to do well here. He says he likes being the underdog, but we'll see how the night plays out. Still some time to go before we know his final finish.
Yeah, just up by currently about 1 percentage point over Nikki Haley Witt. Thank you. Now let's head back over to the big boards with political director Rick Klein. Rick, let's look at the big counties and the new information that you're learning there.
Yeah, so just to look at the most populous counties on the map, they are all being dominated by Donald Trump. You can look right in Des Moines. He's got a lead there, a little west of Des Moines in Dallas County, and all the way to the east, even the College County of Johnson, where the University of Iowa is, or all the way in Davenport. You see Donald Trump. It's almost like, Lindsay, there are two different fields that we're talking about here. You can sort of lop off a portion of the electorate and say those are Trump supporters, and then everyone else fights for the scraps, and you have a Haley and DeSantis fight from there. And just what's so striking to me is how different that is from 2016, when Trump was on the ballot. Donald Trump won none of those counties. He got swamped in a whole bunch of these places. Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz both beating him in the most populous county in the state, where Des Moines is in Polk County. And over to the east, once again, this is a place where Donald Trump's messages didn't catch on the same way. You saw all of these urban and suburban Republican voters who were rebelling against Donald Trump the first time they had an opportunity to vote on this. And yet today, you see them all flipping to Donald Trump. So you're looking at a map tonight that quite frankly, starts to look pretty repetitive. You start getting a lot of Donald Trump counties around the state, whether it's rural or urban, suburban, everything other than one county right now in northwest Iowa that's a heavily evangelical county is a Donald Trump county. That's a big, big shift from 8 years ago in the exact same state. The state has changed a lot, but the Republican Party has probably changed even more.
Yeah, we can imagine that. All right, Rick Klein, we'll ask you to stay with us until the wee hours. Thank you so much. The focus tonight is likely on Trump winning the Iowa caucuses and the Republican candidates running for second place. And while voters and viewers are watching from home, we can imagine so too is the Biden campaign and national Democrats. Joining us now, Democratic National Committee Chairman Jamie Harrison. Mr. Harrison, thanks so much for joining us. According to our partners at 538, a national average of current polling shows President Biden losing to both Nikki Haley and Donald Trump and just barely beating Ron DeSantis. Right off the bat, is President Biden prepared to take on whomever ends up as a Republican nominee?
We're well prepared to take on whomever comes out of this Republican, you can call it a caucus, a primary, or a circus. It doesn't matter. I mean, listen, in the end of the day, today's battle was between Trump 1.0, Trump 2.0, and Trump 3.0. You know, in the end of the day, they all have a toxic MAGA agenda that wants to ban abortion, rip away health care, take away the right to vote, cutting taxes for the big, wealthy corporations and donors, and cutting Medicare and Social Security. But there's a lot of momentum building up on the Democratic side under the leadership of President Biden and Vice President Harris. Just today, we announced that the president and the party has $117 million cash on hand, and $97 million that we raised in the fourth quarter. And many of these donations, 97% of them were small dollar donations. And we added a third of those donors were new donors, but first-time donors donating to Joe Biden. So, you know, I know people like to take to bet a lot on these polls, but, you know, 538 said that we were going to have a red wave in the midterm, and we had a bunch of red tears. In the end of the day, the most important poll is what happens on Election Day. And I believe that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are going to win like they won in 2020.
But do humor me for a moment, because according to our partners at 538, we do want to rely on those polls for now. The president's favorability rating is at its lowest point ever, with just 39.9% of Americans having a favorable view of him, while a majority, 55%, have an unfavorable view. How do you overcome this in an election year?
Well, we overcame it in the midterms. We overcame it last November. And we'll do it again. And it's because Joe Biden has a record to run on. When you look up and you stack up all of the legislative achievements of this president, from the American Rescue Plan to the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law to the Inflation Reduction Act to the PACT Act to the CHIPS and Science Act, I mean, just one of those legislative achievements would have been the foundation for an administration for 4 years. But Joe Biden was able to do all of that. I forgot gun safety legislation, student loan debt relief. This president has accomplished more legislatively, probably against all administrations since LBJ. And LBJ had a Senate, over 60 senators and 300 members of the House. Joe Biden had a 50-50 Senate on a good day and a 5-seat majority, the same 5-seat majority that the Republicans had in the House, and they can't get anything done. So I know that we have the record to run on. The president, the vice president, and everybody's going across the country to make sure that the American people are aware of it. And in the end of the day, Joe Biden's going to win again.
By most measures, the U.S. economy is a strong one. Recession fears have evaporated. Unemployment rate is low. Gas prices have dropped, while wages in many sectors in the stock market have risen. But the economy remains the top issue for voters in Iowa, that and immigration pretty much. Barely a quarter of Americans, though, say the American dream still holds true. What does that say about the disconnect that we have here with the administration?
Well, I think it's more of a disconnect. We got a lot of, this was a very MAGA caucus. I mean, most of these folks said that, you know, if Donald Trump got convicted for a crime, they'd still support him. I mean, if we're going to be a nation of laws, then we need to stick with those laws, and those laws have to apply to everybody, not just a select few. And so in the end of the day, when this goes into the general election, and Joe Biden and Donald Trump are right there, and they are making that contrast, you got one president who wakes up each and every day thinking about how he can improve the life of all of Americans, and you got one president thinking about how can I get power again. Donald Trump just said just the other day that he wanted to be a dictator on day one. He said that, you know, it'd be okay if the U.S. economy cratered for the next few months. Again, this is a guy who believes that you can rip away health care from folks, that women shouldn't have the ability to control their own bodies. That is not where the American people are. Joe Biden is fighting for the freedom of all Americans, and that is going to be the contrast that we have going into November.
Only 13% of voters say that they feel better off financially since Biden has taken office, according to a new ABC News Ipsos poll. Safe to say they're not feeling the positive economy. Why do you feel that the Biden administration is not successful at achieving or being able to convince Americans that the economy is looking up?
Well, you know, a lot of the things that the president has been able to do is starting to kick in now. Take, for instance, the student loan forgiveness. I'm hearing from so many people. Just the other day, we were with the president and Mother Emanuel, and somebody came up to me and told me that they just got their letter from the president forgiving all of their student loans. That's a game changer. That is a life changer for many folks. Just a week or so ago, we are now seeing that insulin is capped at $35 a month for many of our seniors. That's going to be a game changer. Many folks pay hundreds of dollars a month to pay for insulin. All of that happened because of Joe Biden and Democrats. And more the benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act, the American Rescue Plan, all of these things, these positive legislation passed by Democrats that a lot of Republicans are trying to take credit for, those things are now starting to percolate, and people are starting to see them and feel the impact. And so this is the right time for that to really ripen, right? Because we're going into that election season. So again, I have no doubt this president has an agenda. He's been passing that agenda. He has an agenda for the next 4 years. Remember, Donald Trump in 2020, the RNC didn't even pass a platform. All his agenda is about retribution against those folks who are against him, instead of thinking about how you improve the life of the American people. Bottom line, everyone wants to be seen, heard, and valued. Joe Biden does that. He fights for them every single day. Donald Trump fights for himself.
DNC Chair Jamie Harrison, we thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you joining us tonight. Now I want to take another look at the results right now. Let's take a look, if we could pull up the boards there. With 38% of the vote in, Donald Trump still holding with 52%, followed by Ron DeSantis at 20.3%, Nikki Haley 19%, Vivek Ramaswamy just shy of 8%. It's been a slow trickle of voting data and no word from the party as to why the pace of reporting these results has been so slow, aside from potentially a technical glitch there that we talked to Rick Klein about earlier. Want to bring back in ABC News contributor and former Trump administration official Sarah Isgur. Sarah, thanks so much for joining us tonight. You were part of the Carly Fiorina campaign that came up short in Iowa in 2016. How did the Haley and DeSantis campaigns recalibrate tonight?
Yeah, so absolutely. Normally there's 3 tickets out of Iowa. I think there's a really good chance that there's only 2 tickets out of Iowa tonight. The Haley team went in with expectations that they would overtake DeSantis for that number 2 slot. It's looking really neck and neck right now. And even if it's very tight, if DeSantis does pull out that number 2 position, it's going to change things for Haley heading into New Hampshire. She really needed to win New Hampshire, beating Donald Trump. That's going to be hard to do if she comes in 3rd place today. On the other hand, for DeSantis, coming in second keeps his campaign alive, not really heading into New Hampshire or Nevada after that, but going into South Carolina, where he would then want to be in that head-to-head with Donald Trump potentially, but he'll still have Haley. I don't expect this to be a 2-person race if it's Trump, DeSantis, then Haley coming out of tonight.
And one thing that we're hearing again and again in polls and interviews with voters is they feel financially worse off, that their future prospects are worse than they were in the past. How is that influencing voters?
You know, absolutely, the economy is always going to be a top issue for voters, but I think with Republican caucus goers, I mean, remember, this is different than a primary. This is a caucus where you show up and you're looking at your neighbors and you're seeing your dentist and your chiropractor. It's like the opposite of Twitter. You know, it's not online anonymous speech. This is in-person stuff. These folks have been meeting the candidates. It's why we're seeing such different numbers in Iowa than we've been seeing in those national polls. These voters have actually met these candidates, sometimes 5, 6 times. They've touched them, felt them, poked them. And so why we're looking so closely at Iowa, even though Donald Trump has already won this, is to see when Republican primary voters really start focusing on this primary, what do they think differently, perhaps, than the ones who are just polled nationally who vaguely know who's running?
And looking ahead to the general election, the 2020 presidential election saw record voter turnout. Since then, 25 states have enacted laws restricting voters' rights. Most of these states are Republican or Republican-leaning or swing states. What impact do you see these restrictions having on the election?
Well, it could be a problem for Nikki Haley. Again, she's heading into New Hampshire. She wants that wind in her sails. She's expecting a great finish in New Hampshire. But of course, in New Hampshire, independents can vote in the Republican primary. So even if she does well, expect the Trump camp, the DeSantis camp, to say that she wasn't actually picked by Republican primary voters, but by basically Democrats, Democrat-light independents. Of course, if you think about it, this is all about winning a general election where independents will be incredibly important. So I expect the Haley team to have a pretty good response to that, but they've got a long way to go in the Republican primary in the meantime. And we're seeing that huge education gap right now just coming into these Iowa numbers in the ABC exit or entrance polling, where those non-college educated voters breaking wildly for Donald Trump. The college educated voters, on the other hand, a much closer race between Haley and Trump.
And what's your take on how these new voting laws will play out?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, it will affect the primary and the general. But, you know, we saw in 2022 that it didn't really lower turnout at all. In some states, it was increasing turnout. You know, it's funny when we think about some of these other questions, who do you think is a greater threat to democracy, Republicans or Democrats? Right now, more Americans say that the Democrats are a greater threat to democracy. So it's really different out there in the field in terms of how voters see these laws than perhaps here in the studio as we think about them.
Sarah Isgur, ABC News contributor and senior editor of The Dispatch, we thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Now I want to bring in ABC News' Maria Villarreal. Maria, some really interesting data coming in that I think a number of us were thinking that James Carville famous quote, "It's the economy, stupid." But in Iowa, while economy is the biggest issue that drove voters, just 1% behind that. At 36%, they're talking about immigration. Now, meanwhile, Iowa is about 1,000 miles away from the southern border. Why is this so top of mind?
I think right now the reason is because it's in people's faces, right? You have Texas Governor Greg Abbott pushing migrants from the border to places like Chicago, Los Angeles, New York City. I think there is a true concern that this will happen in the backyards of people everywhere. And so when you have an issue like this front and center that people don't know a lot about, immigration is extremely complicated. But all people are seeing right now are the buses, are the border wall. And when you have candidates that are using these hot topic items and phrases like deportations or border wall or, remain in Mexico policy, and you have voters that don't truly understand how the system works, then it becomes a very scary topic for them, and one that is out of control, and one that could be in their own communities very soon and looming. And so the idea is that we're not taking care of the problem, and that is exactly why, it's resonating with voters right now.
And interestingly, Trump voters are saying that immigration is their #1 issue. Perhaps no surprise. He was the first president to talk about building the wall and making Mexico pay for it. He wasn't able to get it done during his first term. Talk to us about the complexities of building a wall along the full border.
So for people that don't know, right, the border, the southwest border is 2,000 miles long, right? The idea of being able to build a border wall that far along is just nearly impossible. And that has a lot to do with the terrain that's out there. And also in places like Texas, you have a natural barrier, which is the Rio Grande River. When Trump came in, again, I think he was relying on the fact that people don't know and have never been to these border communities. So by going and saying, we're going to build this wall and Mexico is going to pay for it, well, who's going to call him out on that? It's not going to be the voters in Iowa, because they're not going to go down there and see it. I do think that this will be a huge point of contention that we will hear candidates continue to talk about for months, because it just seems to really scare people into wanting to go to the polls. I'm not even sure why that is. I think it's because they just don't understand the topic.
And we've heard Ron DeSantis talk multiple times about shooting anybody cold stone, cold stone dead, if they have a hoodie and a backpack, and he believes that they're going to cross the border with fentanyl. All right, Maria, thank you so much. And we are going to toss to break right now. A lot more ahead with our coverage of ABC News Live, Your Voice, Your Vote. Stay with us.